Thank you, choir, for bringing your gifts. And I was only kidding about the three-part harmony and descant on that children's song, but you did fine. All of you did a great job. Thank you for bringing your hearts, your voices, your gifts to this time of sacred worship. Not just because today's Consecration Sunday, but because every day we're called to serve God with our hearts, our minds, our strength, and with all our soul, with our whole being. Now, if I could put a soundtrack to today's gospel reading, Mark chapter 13, I would have to pick that old jazz standard that's been covered by everyone from Billie Holiday, Frank Sinatra, and even Steubenville's own Dean Martin. Do you know the song? It's the sermon title for today. All of me, why not take all of me? I'm showing my age. Sing that with me, please. All of me, why not take all of me? You're showing your age too. I'll tell you, it's a great song. I love those old jazz standards, and that one's been in my heart. It's been on my mind all week as I've been working with this passage from Mark's Gospel. You see, Mark gives us the historical account of this very faithful, humble, servant woman who gives God all of herself. You heard it read this morning. Jesus is sitting across from the treasury in one of the outer courts of the temple. And there are all sorts of people coming up to the treasury, some very wealthy folks, and they're putting lots of money into the treasury. Now, it's no sweat off their back. They're not putting in anything that's causing them any suffering, any stress. It's a good thing to give to the treasury. Jesus isn't critiquing them for giving, but it's obvious that they're giving out of an abundance. They've got cash to spare, and so they're going to flip God a bone or two. They're going to give God some money. But then comes along this very faithful, this very humble, this very strong woman, a poor widow, says Mark's Gospel. And she comes up to the treasury and she puts in everything she's got. And you know what she's got? She's got 2 half pennies. That's all she's got. And she puts in these 2 half pennies. It adds up to 1 penny, basically worthless. And yet she gives it all to God. It's all she's got. If you think about a penny and its value, it's not much to most of us, is it? Come on. Even some of you guys, I see it on the street, who are looking for change, and I go to give you change. If I got pennies, you don't want them. But that widow, that's all she had. That's all she had to live on. Do you know, I was up visiting in Canada not too long ago, and I found out that Canada, the government, voted to get rid of the penny because the penny costs more to make than the penny's worth. Now, I'm thinking, how are they going to do this? I bet you any money, I'll bet you my pennies, that the government is going to round up on everything so they come out winning. But anyway, that's another story. They're getting rid of the penny because it's not worth anything. Costs more to make than it's worth. That's all this woman had to live on, 2 half pennies, and she gave it all. She gave it all. And Jesus said to his disciples, look at that woman. What faith she has. She gave more than anyone else gave to the treasury. This woman who gave a worthless penny gave more than anyone else. And if you're like the disciples, you might be there scratching your heads and saying, now, why did she give more than everyone else who gave all this other money? Jesus said, well, look, those people who gave a lot of money, they gave out of their abundance. They had money to spare. They probably were giving God what they had left over at the end of the week, and that was probably still quite significant. They were like the guys in that old joke. You remember the guy who says, oh, I give lots of money to God. I take my paycheck at the end of the week, I go down to the bank, I cash it, and I take all that money and I throw it up into the air. And I say, Lord, what stays up is yours. What comes down is mine. But the poor widow, says Jesus, the poor widow, says Jesus, gave out of her poverty. Now, I want to pause here for a second and tell you that as much as I love the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, the one I read out of this morning, the one that's in your pews, as much as I love that version, every now and then I like to go back to the King James Version, the one I was raised on, the one many of you were raised on. And today is one of those days, because when I go back to the King James Version, I think the King James Version gets the translation a little better. It's a little more accurate. You see, in the King James Version, it says, when that woman gave, she gave out of her want. It doesn't say she gave out of her poverty. It gave out of her desire, her want, her need to serve God. She gave out of a poverty of spirit, would be a more accurate translation, a longing to know God, a longing to love God, a longing and a want to be with God. You get the difference, right? These guys who were giving out of their abundance, they were just throwing money off almost thoughtlessly. I imagine some were giving as a big show of it. Oh, look, I made this great endowment to the Lord, and we'll have a special honoring service for my special gift. There's nothing wrong with that. Notice Jesus does not critique them for giving those large sums. But he does make a point of this woman, this poor woman, who gives out of her longing to love God. It's as if she gets what Donald Gunther was telling us last week in his Moment for Mission. It's not that God needs our money. It's that we need to know what it is to give. You know, when I first came to the Old Stone Church and I looked at the givings a number of years ago, and I thought, wow, our givings are not as high as they could be. And I put a little graph in the news. Gosh, the room's getting really quiet now. I said, what's he going to say? You can just feel the tension. Cut it with a knife. I put a little graph in the newsletter, and I showed our average givings compared to other Presbyterian church average givings. And somebody said to me, well, Mark, we have a lot of poor folks in our church. And I said, yes, we do, like every church does. Then somebody said to me, well, Mark, you know, people don't think the Old Stone Church needs money. We do, by the way. We are always working on the line, like every church. People say, well, maybe the church doesn't need my gift, so I don't need to give. I said, listen, we don't give because the church needs the gift. We give because it's part of our godly nature to give. It's part of our Christian discipline. We have a longing and a desire to love God with heart and soul and strength and might. That widow got it. Maybe others didn't, but that poor widow got it. I don't know how many of you were here last Sunday, but I'll tell you, Joseph Giuliano and Mary Jane Sikora and Kim Williams and all the little children who sat up here at the front of the church did a beautiful job dramatizing this story in a skit. If you were here, you remember Joseph came in first, the wealthy man giving. I think Joseph really enjoyed playing that part. He had the rings on and the long robe, and I was thinking I was hearing Tevye singing or something. And Joseph, you know, he had one staircase coming up and one staircase going down. And he came up and right up onto the chancel, and he put all this money, and he was lavishing it into the treasury. And then as Kim read about the poor widow who came and offered her lowly, humble 2 half-pennies, we saw Mary Jane. Some of you may not know that was Mary Jane Sikora under that cloth over her head. And she came up so humbly. And she came up with kind of desire to love God. And you notice something I don't know if they planned it or not, or if Mary Jane came up on this all on her own, but it was so right to do. Well, Joseph came up here and he started throwing coins into the treasury. Mary Jane came from below. She came very humbly and offered her gift of 2 halfpennies, her 2 copper coins, lifted them up in humility out of a desire to love and serve God. She lifted it up from below. In the same way, after our prayers today, you'll be invited to come and put your pledges in from below. We come with a desire, a longing to love God with our heart and our soul, our strength and our mind, and to love our neighbors as one of our own, because that's what Christ asks of us. To love Him and to love others in His name completely and fully. And that's what she did, didn't she? She loved with want. The Scripture says some gave out of their abundance. She gave out of her want, her desire, her need to love God fully. All of me, she said, Lord, take all of me. Now, something very interesting happened in our nation this past week. We re-elected our president. And I know some people that makes them feel one thing, some people makes them feel another, some it may not make them feel anything, and that's not what I'm here to talk to you about. What I am here to talk to you about is how we love God and how we love country and how we love our brothers and sisters in this great nation following an election. See, what I see is falling into this pattern in America where we go and vote. Some of you voted early, some of you voted on election day, but we come and vote, and more people than any other election show up for a presidential election. We had almost 2,000 people show up to vote here on Tuesday because Old Stone's a voting site. But what people do is they vote, and then for the next 4 years, they grumble. Some say, well, don't blame me, I didn't vote for the guy. And some say, well, I voted for him, but I'm not too happy about this policy, and I'm not too happy about that policy. It seems to me the challenge that Christ puts before us, especially on a dedication Sunday, a consecration Sunday, is how will we love God and love country with more than a vote? How do we do that with all of our being? Do we just vote and then just grumble for the next 4 years? Or do we each have an opportunity to use the gifts that God has given to us and invest them in our communities right here at home to make a difference for this great nation? Today is November 11th. And while we're here celebrating Consecration Sunday, we would be remiss if we forgot those people in the First World War, the Second World War, Korean War, Vietnam War, all our current conflicts and wars, who are laying down their lives continually for our freedom and to bring peace to this earth. It's more than just a vote. It's more than just throwing a few coins that we've got left over at the end of the week into a collection basket. It's about loving God fully with our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength, loving God with our desire, our want, our need to love, not just on a Sunday and not just on a Sunday at 6 p.m. or 10 a.m., but every day, every moment. An opportunity to serve God with all the gifts that we've been given. And that may mean making a pledge to your church, getting involved in the local community. That may mean growing a mustache for Movember to help raise awareness about prostate cancer. It may mean using the gifts that God has given you so that you can give it back to God and give it to the world, serve Him continually. You know, I did something this past week that I'm ashamed to admit I have never, ever done in my life. But when I did it, I felt amazing. I felt great for doing it. As I said, I'm ashamed to admit I've never done it. My wife has done it regularly for years. Many of you in this room do it often, do it regularly. What did I do? My good friend Richard knows what I did because I did it at Rotary this past week. I gave blood. I thought to myself, okay, we had this election. We've re-elected President Obama. Now what am I going to do? What am I going to give back to God and country? Heck, Jesus gave him his whole self for all of us. I can give a little blood at Rotary on a Thursday at noon. And you know what? It felt amazing to do it. Oh yeah, I had to dig around in my arm a little bit to find the vein, and he kept trying to reassure me, are you all right? Are you all right? I go, I'm fine, buddy, but I hope you're okay because your aim is terrible. But you know what? I felt so good giving blood that after I gave blood, I went into the Rotary meeting, and they kept the buffet open a little longer for those people who were giving blood that day. I had the biggest lunch you can ever imagine. And not only because they told me I needed to eat a lot, but because I was filled with a kind of joy in knowing that I could make a difference now. Right here, right now. It wasn't just about a vote or not a vote. It was about the difference I could make by giving all of me, or even just a part of me, back to this world. Do you know, this past Tuesday, I wasn't even in the country. I did vote. I voted early for the first time in my life. I felt weird about that. I'm old school. I like to show up on the day. I like, especially here, because this is where I vote. I run down from the office and I make friends with the people working at the voting stations, and I like to greet the neighbors from downtown who are coming. But I had to be out of town this past week because they were holding a memorial service at the hospital where my father used to work. And it was a memorial service for all those people who had donations made in their memory to the hospital foundation. Some of you made donations in memory of my father, and I thank you. I appreciate it greatly. So I went up for this memorial service with Beth, and Tuesday night was the service, and there was about 50 people who were being remembered at this memorial service. And so about 200 or 300 friends and family gathered around. A lot of grief, a lot of poverty of spirit in that room that evening. And after the service was over and after the visiting happened, my mom and my wife Beth and I went back to my mother's house. Beth went off into another room to read, and my mother and I sat down on the couch in her rec room, and we started watching the voting returns. I want to see how this thing's going to turn out. And because my dad, before he passed away, got about a bazillion channels put on his television set, we were able to flash around to different channels to see how different media outlets were reporting the election. So we got the different spin, the different hype, depending on what channel you were watching. My mom says, "Oh, Mark, I've had enough. I'm going to bed." It's about 10:30, quarter to 11. I said, well, I'm going to hang in there. I want to see how my fellow Ohioans, they're all watching Ohio. But after my mom went to bed, it sort of dawned on me that having been to a memorial service and then coming to watch election returns puts it all in perspective. It's not about electing this guy or electing that guy and then just grumbling for 4 years. It's about making a difference in our own families. It's about making a drive 7 hours north to Canada to be with your mother when her husband is being memorialized. It's about making a difference with your friends in your own community, living out of your desire to love God by loving your family, your friends, your community, by stepping up and making a difference right here, right now. Grow a mustache, give some blood, make a pledge to your church. That's what makes this world great. And that's how we give, like that widow gave that Jesus taught the disciples about so long ago. Now, Jesus is only asking us to give all of ourselves, I suspect, because that's the way he gave himself. You think about it. 2,000 years ago, when Jesus hauled that cross up to Golgotha, he wasn't just giving blood. He was giving all of himself. You know, I think today if I could change the sign that they tacked on the cross above Jesus' head that said King of the Jews, I'd like to rip that sign down. I'd like to put up another one that says all of me. All of me. That's what Jesus gave for each and every one of us. All of me. So today, when you come forward to bring your pledges and put them in these baskets, I'd like to challenge you to say a little prayer as you do. As you lift your gift, the way that widow gave her 2 coins into the treasury, I'd like you to whisper a little prayer or say it in your heart. All of me, Lord. Why not take all of me? Amen.